GM, everybody. There we go. Let's see. It's been a busy week for all of me over here in security. I was going to say us, but it sounded a little pretentious, so whatever. We have a relatively small audience here, so you feel free to. I'm just going to distribute invitations to everybody in case you just want to hop up on stage. So it's not a. Right, that is a bot. Check. Okay. Anyway, the
bot has stuff to say too. Come on now, Mr. Nerdhead.
Equal opportunity for everyone. Right. Okay. I think I got. Oh, I missed Skykadelic. Okay. There we go. I got everybody who's not a bot, I think. Okay. So I've been working on a bunch of stuff recently. I want to go over Pendo with people if that's something that y'all want to hear more about. But I don't want that to trample on anything anybody else wants to talk about. So one of the major purposes of security is to be here as a resource for other DAO members and work streams. So like if you have something you want to talk about, this is a perfectly appropriate time to bring it up.
Hey, Mr. Nerdhair.
Hey.
I really do want to hear a little bit about Pendo too, just so ops can be ready for a go-no-go if we want to schedule our first one. But I thought that this re-entrancy hack that happened on the Gnosis chain yesterday would be a really good thing to get your insight on the hack on Agave and 100. I posted a couple of links in general about it, but it's something that, in terms of two DAOs being hacked, definitely has piqued my concern. And I know that we use Gnosis in different ways, and we pay people on the Gnosis chain. So I feel like we're not necessarily in any sort of vulnerable place considering what they did. But I'd love to just hear your thoughts on what that is and any sort of mitigation steps that we as a DAO might need to take that we currently aren't taking, or what we are currently doing to prevent a similar attack from attacking Fox or something like that.
Well, you have you've caught me, unfortunately, unawares here because I did not notice that this occurred yesterday. But thank you. I'm looking at it. Some of the stuff I can see on that's been written about it. The core, I guess, this isn't super surprising. Just because reentrancy attacks are one of the sort of evergreen problems that people can accidentally allow when they are making smart contracts. The Gnosis chain angle, I don't think, like Gnosis chain, it was deployed on Gnosis chain, but there's nothing special about Gnosis chain that would enable reentrancy any more than any other Ethereum L2. The tricky bit is that there's if you know that reentrancy is going to be a problem somewhere, then there's an easy guard you can put on the function to stop it. But especially when people are building very complicated systems, it can be difficult to think laterally enough to realize, even during audits, unfortunately, to realize that certain things are vulnerable to attacks that could be enabled by reentrancy. in general, reentrancy isn't a bad thing. It's just, a thing that happens to be true. And it could be useful in some places. I can imagine, a lot of those cases, sort of like crypto itself, a lot of the use cases enabled by reentrancy aren't currently relevant due to the economic cost of transactions, or other associated overheads. But in theory, that flexibility is important to be able to have in the language to be able to build interesting things on in the future. Everything that gets the headlines are bad use cases of it, but that's sort of true of crypto in general. I could imagine, for example, a wallet. You could make a contract wallet that would automatically redeem shares in an underlying position when you wanted to do a transfer out, just as an example.
Right.
Well, if you had a position in a Yearn vault, say, and you wanted to deposit into another Yearn vault, well, you might very well end up calling two functions on the same contract at different points in your call stack, right? You would call the deposit function on the vault contract. That would call transfer from. It would go down the chain until it got to the wallet, and the wallet actually had to liquidate stuff and then call back into it. The block gas limit and the overall price of gas mean that a lot of those real interesting patterns don't show up a lot. So it can be tempting to just say, let's put reentrancy protection on everything in the universe. But I do think that's a mistake from an architectural standpoint. Still, it is somewhat discouraging to realize that this is a hard problem. The problem of designing secure smart contracts, and even against the reentrancy is like the granddaddy of all Ethereum bugs. One of the things I noticed at ETH Denver was just how little people talked about the smart contract side of things. There was plenty of workshops on like how to start building your own smart contract with our framework or whatever, but relatively little on discussions about the EVM and about compiler bugs or just different compilers or how to write contracts safely. So I think that in order, for this space, the whole crypto space to flourish, we're going to have to mitigate these sorts of attacks one way or the other. And they can be mitigated through better engineering up front, or they can be mitigated by regulators coming in and slapping a layer of red tape on top of everything later. And I think it's to our advantage to make sure that everything is as bulletproof as possible.
Yeah, and obviously, Mr. Nerdhair, you're going to take your time and probably read this use case and figure out more details on it. But I have been kind of back and forth between the different DAOs and watching it and hearing about the discussion and stuff. So it seems like that part of the partial of the problem is the reentry was done so that for the tunnel for the bridge, that they could pull, if someone mistakenly sent funds over the bridge, or to prevent them from sending funds mistakenly over the bridge and getting it into the Gnosis chain. So it seems to be that almost every one of the contracts or tokens on the Gnosis chain has this vulnerability currently. Another partial problem that they see going forward is that the way Gnosis is designed, it allows these tokens from different chains, ERC20s and stuff, to be basically brought into wrapped over into the Gnosis chain, and anyone can put whatever they want into them once they're wrapped in there. So they really don't have the control to be able to, um, you know, say that this token doesn't have that vulnerability unless it's been, specifically um, audited and checked out beforehand and stuff. So what basically happened was in the attack, an individual or individuals introduced a token from, was brought over onto Gnosis chain. It had this vulnerability that went off on a certain block number. They were able to obviously, accumulate a lot of wrapped ETH. And utilize that as the flash attack to basically then liquidate all of the assets on these two lending platforms, and then basically pull their money back over the bridge and take it into mainnet. And then it's been rumored that they took it to, Tornado, and just basically washed their money and got rid of it.
So the thing that I've seen, there may be more than one thing that that happened yesterday. The thing that I see, or that I'm reading about right now, is it seems to be blamed on the fact that Gnosis bridge tokens have a callback.
Yep.
So that you can run stuff when the transfer occurs. That is, I mean, I see exactly why people would rush to blame that as the problem. But the fundamental issue, is you should not assume that if you're calling a transfer function on a token that somebody won't end up with a callback somewhere. This has happened on mainnet a few times as well, when people use. Actually, it was one of the things that affected the Thorchain router contract. They had several issues with the Thorchain ERC or Ethereum blah blah ERC20 router contract, but one of them was that if you had an evil token and the token supported the token advertised support for ERC 1155, then you would get a callback sent out to after the transfer, and then that could be used to do malicious things. The key insight there, though, isn't that the problem is that the callbacks were allowed. The key insight is that you decided to trust that that transfer function will operate according to the ERC20 standard. So, and the other thing is there's nothing in the standard that says you can't have callbacks there, right? So they were always possible. They just never really occurred because no one happened to implement that functionality. And if you should assume as a contract developer that any call to an external function, unless it's specifically something that you've audited the code for and you can make those assumptions about, you should assume that any of those functions can go off and do interesting reentrancy things. So I don't blame this on Gnosis Chain's implementation of tokens. I think that's like literally a feature they added. It's just that the feature they added can be used for bad things under certain circumstances, and everybody had sort of been tacitly assuming that it couldn't because no one had really tried it before. I mean, we're sort of dealing with, we're talking about launching Foxy, and one of the things we realized there is that Foxy, the code for it, it's based on the staked ohm stuff. It doesn't follow the ERC20 standard, technically speaking, and it means it breaks balance charts in our own app. So, it doesn't emit transfer events on rebase event when rebases occur, and that's because it would be gas impractical. It would be impossible to ever run a rebase like that and follow the standard. But because the standard is broken and some other components are assuming that the contract implements it, you have bad things happen, and you got to. It's tricky to trust that any token implements a standard properly unless you've audited it yourself. You can get into trouble by adding tokens to your wallet, for example, like adding it to MetaMask or something and thinking, oh, I'm just going to send this token, but you're not. You're making an arbitrary contract call that may or may not do something malicious or what you want. Anyway, like I said, I haven't looked at this in super detail, so I can't speak to it definitively, but that's my impression. Let's see.
So it sounds like this is a case of DeFi is new, smart contracts are new. We don't have the playbook yet for all of the attack vectors and what to expect and what we need to protect against. It's kind of inevitable, isn't it?
I think, I mean, you're right. I think that a more like the subtle problem is that the version of the playbook being used by the people who wrote the bridge and the people who wrote the Aave contracts, for example, or compound contracts, is slightly different. The bridge people see no problem with adding a callback because it could be useful. And the Aave people see a problem with adding that. They think it's a poor design decision because it could enable attacks. And unfortunately, security stuff frequently gets into, like, especially when an attack actually happens, the blame game is always foremost in everyone's mind. Essentially, obviously, if an attack has happened, it's because there was a bug somewhere, right? Where was the bug? Let's identify it. And whoever's code that's in, they're responsible and they're bad. And frequently, that's not a very useful analysis. So in this case, I think that a stronger emphasis on, I mean, I could put it crassly and just say the Aave people should have audited their contracts better or something. But I think we do have an overall problem that there isn't we should have some sort of tooling or some sort of documentation or standards or something like they do with OWASP for Web 2 security. And I think that might go a long way towards making sure everyone's reading off the same sheet of music, so to speak. If everyone's working towards the same standard and it's clear that it's that the security in here, this particular property is somebody or other's responsibility, then it's much more likely to happen. You're adding the security protection is much more likely to happen. Anyway.
Right. But the point I always try to emphasize during events like this is, the sky's not falling, right? This is not, oh, DeFi is terrible and look at people getting scammed. It's like, if you look at all the scams going on in other industries, I'm sure you would get the same impression there. This is more of you're living in a forest, so forest fires are inevitable. You could do your best, you could do better, sure. But especially in a new industry, there's no getting around this, especially since blockchain is directly related to the transfer of assets digitally, right?
Yeah, and the key thing that's different about crypto versus other stuff is just, I mean, it's usually not like you said, there's scams in all sorts of industries and people spend large amounts of time trying to figure out how to, for example, get around a certain tax in the US tax code or whatever, or how to, exploit some government program for massive damage. Well, the problem is that in those things, the exploit process is slow enough that it usually doesn't scale well, right? Whereas with DeFi, because we all use computers and because, we understand that the ability to automate things and therefore make them building blocks that you can, create the future out of, is a lot more valuable than slowing down attackers in certain potential scenarios. If you find a bug somewhere, you can often steal, $1 zillion just as easily as you could steal like $2 or whatever. So, I mean, as far as the contract cares, it's just a certain number of a certain token and whatever. In this case, it looks like the Aave contracts were written assuming that tokens would never do a certain thing, and they had a whitelist of tokens, but then somebody later added to the whitelist these Gnosis bridge tokens that violate that security assumption. It's sort of almost a documentation problem, like everybody, there was an assumption that somebody made, and assumptions are not necessarily bad, because you have to make assumptions about things in order to prove things, the security properties of things. So somebody said the prerequisite for this to be secure is that the token not behave in this way, but because it wasn't clear whose responsibility it was to make sure of that, it just got added, and nobody, and then everything broke.
Yeah, well, and whether it's the case, like you said, no blame, but obviously cloning Aave from mainnet to a different bridged EVM, XDAI, and then Gnosis um, had unintended consequences because they basically cloned Aave as a solution, put it up on XDAI, thinking that it would be okay, and then on top of that, they introduced recently flash loans. And once you created the conditions where you could do the flash loan and the recall function, it just made for a perfect environment for someone who was able to figure that out and exploit it, to where they created the flash loan, took out a ton of wrapped ETH, and then just basically liquidated all the assets, and then just called the recall function and just took their gains and reverted back over. So yeah, it was like you said, it wasn't one thing. There's no blame to go. It's just as they were building on the platform and as they were building up, their product line, they were just adding pieces that they thought were logical pieces that were necessary to compete in the environments. And it just made for the foundation just became littered with holes or Swiss cheese or whatever, and that just allowed for situations where it wasn't just seen beforehand.
The part of the ways that, or lessons I think we could learn, I guess, is the ways to stop something like this happening in general. It's frequently useful to make sure that small changes can't have large impacts when possible. Like, you want it to be really obvious if you're doing something security relevant that it is security relevant, right? Like this sort of segues into Pendo nicely. One of the frequently common things that somebody might get asked to do on a Web 2 site is to, a Web 3 site, any kind of website, is to add a snippet of code to a page. I mean, they're always called snippets. I don't know, whatever. This is usually to integrate with somebody or other's wonderful product. In this case, Pendo, right? Well, the problem is that any of those snippets, like, the snippet might be like one line long, but the code at the other end of the URL that you're telling it the user's browser to load will get like full perms to screw with anything on your page. So by adding that one line, you've now opened an extremely large, that one line has a potentially extremely large impact on the security. That's not to say it necessarily adds a security hole. See, that's the tricky bit, because you can say stuff like adding snippets is insecure or whatever, but it's not always, because sometimes you can be sure what's actually getting loaded via the snippet, and then you can go and audit the entire darn thing, right? Like, so that's what I did with Pendo. And it's one of the reasons it's taken so long to get the stupid Pendo stuff working. We've been back and forth with them trying to get them to change some stuff for us, and then they wouldn't change it, and so now we're working around it and whatever. But it's, in order to integrate with their platform, we have to audit all their code, even though it looks like it's a 3-line change or whatever. So the approach we've taken is actually relatively scalable, which is that instead of changing specific things about Pendo's code in order to make sure that it can't have any particular security impact on our users, instead, we've devised a method to intercept all the communications that occur between Pendo and its code, both for loading new code and or guides or whatever, and for sending back analytics events. So it sort of creates a little mini firewall running in the website that you can set up and only allow the certain kinds of commands that are safe. So the Pendo agent, for example, it has some things in it that aren't safe. Now, they're safe if you're a centralized company, because in the centralized company, the assumption is that that you can screw your users. Like, if somebody tried hard enough, they could. Like, if you wanted to screw your users and steal all their stuff, you could just tell the engineering people to do that. You wouldn't have to go through some sort of weird backdoor marketing system in order to do it, because whether or not it gets added to the app explicitly, or whether it gets, inserted via an analytics script, it's the same company doing it, and all the code is usually closed. So it's not like, it's going to be any stealthier, or you're going to get one over on somebody by using the sneaky method of doing it. So, the way they do things allows people to make arbitrary changes to websites. I mean, it doesn't encourage them to, but it can be used to make arbitrary changes, including backdooring things, using the marketing interface. And that's fine in the usual case, but in something like us, where we're an open source platform, and one of the reasons that the users can trust us is because they can trust our open source process. And if anybody tried to add something wonky to the website, then they can trust that we've got a good engineering work stream, and we've got a bunch of people looking at all the changes that go in, and we've got tracking on what those changes are. And as an ordinary user, you can punch in app.shapeshift.com and have reasonable confidence based on that sort of a argument that nobody has put in a big obvious backdoor. And but if we had if we inserted the Pendo client and didn't do any mitigations, then that would break that assumption. The assumptions aren't bad. You just have to make sure that they're always true, and if they're not true, you have to verify them. And so that's what we did with Pendo. We looked through the code and determined that the unsafe stuff can be done in response to one of these 2 or 3 different types of commands. And then we wrote a firewall, essentially, to stop any of those commands from being able to be processed. So that is a very heavyweight relative solution to the problem. But it does have the advantage that you can reuse that sort of thing for other types of integrations, and you don't have the problem that you have to ship a modified version of the Pendo agent, which the Pendo people don't want us doing because their agent isn't open source. I mean, you literally do download the source code of the agent when you run it on your browser. Like, that's what the browser does. But it makes no sense to me how JavaScript code for anything cannot be open source, because essentially it gets run by the browser and it's just code, but whatever. Anyway, the whole verifying your assumptions thing is a recurring theme. It's one of the reasons I'm so I'm like the strict types fairy in the code base, like, go around and make sure that everything is as strictly typed as possible. And, that makes stuff fail early, and it's really annoying. It makes you add extra checks for things to get it to compile. But it helps if you're verifying assumptions as soon as possible, then it just reduces overall badness that can happen. I mean, some of that, like, it's not a strictly security thing. It's like code quality, right? But code quality is a security issue. I mean, even if it's sort of only in a general sense or tangentially related. I think that our Web v2 platform has a significantly lower rate of reported bugs and user issues than the old Axiom platform is, and a lot of that is because the code was just written better with more of those assumptions being checked up front instead of discovered by users at runtime. I mean, that just makes a better experience for everybody, but it also speaks to how much more secure this code is than the old code was. So anyway, whatever. I'm proud of that, and I hope to continue that tradition by beating everyone over the head with TypeScript and flying angle brackets all over the place. Anyway, let's see. Any more specific topics, questions that anybody has? I want to talk about IPFS briefly if nobody does. And I'm also realizing I'm not checking the stage chat because I'm dumb. No, okay, we're good. So one of the things that security is working on right now with Will from the foundation and with engineering in general is moving towards using IPFS for the primary deployment of our website. So that's cool. The primary advantage we get to that, we get by doing that, is that the hosting process of the website becomes independent of like one specific provider. So IPFS will connect you with, you just by a content hash, by a particular IPFS identifier, it will connect you with somebody or other in the world that happens to be serving that. Now, practically speaking, unless you wanted all traffic from ShapeShift to try and load stuff from your personal computer at home, you still better pay for hosting. So it's not like it's a price thing, but it makes it decentralized in that anybody in the world can host that. And it's a permissionless process, and it can be run by directly from the GitHub repository, essentially. You can take it, you can build it, you'll get the same code each time, and you can have confidence that if you're visiting the website and the website is being served from the DNS link record for the website points to a particular content hash, that's what you'll get in the browser. It makes it a lot harder for people to inject any malicious code during the build process. The IPFS changeover will require a few technical things to be fixed, like we'll have to move to hash routing for navigating through pages in our app, because IPFS doesn't support like a fallback page like Cloudflare Pages does. That'll also conveniently keep which particular page you're in on the app secret from the upstream provider. So right now, Cloudflare could technically tell that you were visiting an asset page for the Fox token under certain circumstances, not by default, but if you followed a link into it, or if you happen to hit refresh on your browser or something like that, it's possible those URLs could be sent to a third party. But with hash routing, will fix that, and it will enable everything to be verifiable on the user side too. We're one of the things I've been doing this week is some research on that. We intend to have that live middle of next month, I believe is the timeline. I'll be excited when we do that because essentially at that point anybody can fork like the app and the whole deployment process really easily, which will be convenient for development, but also convenient for making sure that you as the user can trust that no secret person somewhere has the credentials to screw you over. Everything will have to be upfront from the repository only. Anyway, so I'm excited about that, and I wanted to share that because it's getting actually done, which is neat.
So how do you expect the hosting fees to change once we're on IPFS?
So that's a good question. I don't know enough about the specific like fee structure and pricing for Cloudflare pages in order to answer the question directly. But currently we use Cloudflare pages, which is a thing that pulls the Git repository, runs a build on it, and then hosts the static files for us. That's all Cloudflare that does all that stuff. When we move to IPFS, we'll probably be using the Cloudflare IPFS gateway to serve the site. They won't be hosting things, but they will do the usual stuff Cloudflare does, like caching, and they will probably have to pay them for bandwidth. The underlying files will be compiled and hosted by a service called Fleek, and we'll probably have to pay them, and we'll probably have to pay Cloudflare, but I don't anticipate the total being significantly higher or necessarily significantly lower than just paying Cloudflare for both the storage and the bandwidth parts of the equation. Cloudflare has very scalable infrastructure there, but we could theoretically move away from Fleek at some point if we wanted to. We could run builds manually. We could set them up probably to run with GitHub Actions or something. We could use different pinning providers. So if there is cost optimization to be done after that, we'll be in a better place to do it. With Cloudflare pages, we're sort of stuck. It's like, if they raise their prices, there's nothing we can do about it, right? But anyhow. The Cloudflare IPFS domain, or IPFS gateway, by the way, is permissionless. So anybody can use it, or any other IPFS gateway that's publicly available to host whatever they want, or to serve whatever they want, I suppose. You still have to host the files yourself, because internally it's just connecting you to whoever happens to be pinning that file on IPFS. So either you do it yourself, literally on your local browser, or with a daemon on your local computer, or you can set up a server for it, or you can pay somebody to put it on their server, which is what most people do because it's easier. All hail the cloud. Anyhow, that's basically all I have queued up as far as news goes today. I'm working on Pendo stuff. So I talked about Pendo in the abstract as far as timelines and so forth on that goes. This week, Major Haze is out from Tuesday forward. That threw a little bit of a wrench into my plans to get the alpha site completely deployed this week because I need to go through the architectural stuff with him and DeFi on how that's going to work. So we have that scheduled for next week sometime. The staging site, I may still be able to get ready to go by the end of the week because the Pendo firewall stuff, it will prevent anything that hasn't been gone through the PR review process from loading, and that includes guides. like new guides or the Pendo Designer GUI or something. So when the marketing people want to create new guides or customize things or whatever, they'll have a staging site to do that on, and then they'll make a PR to add those changes to the list of things that are approved. And that way everything, you know, has a traceable history and is reviewable and all that sort of stuff. And the staging site doesn't require as much paranoia because it's not used to hold, you know, real funds, not a public thing that users use. So that can probably go up somewhat sooner. I hope to have that ready by Friday. We'll see. Anyhow, I just wanted to go through that because I knew that Tyler was waiting for that answer. I'll wait a few more minutes to see if anybody has any specific questions. Tyler says HSTS. Okay, that's useful to talk about because nobody knows what it is and it's important. HSTS stands for HTTP Strict Transport Security. It's a header that you set on your website that tells the browser that this website only ever uses HTTPS. Never load it with HTTP. Okay? So HTTP, these days, most websites are served over HTTPS, but they, when you punch in the domain name, you may still be loading that site over HTTP to start with. What'll happen is the first request you make will contain a redirect, usually a moved permanently redirect, telling the browser, go load the HTTPS version instead. So that's why, you know, if you punch in http://google.com manually, a lot of times, I mean, like all the time, it will turn into HTTPS just by magic. So the problem with that is that your users end up on HTTPS, but if they were in some sort of like a coffee shop with somebody running attack software sitting next to you, or under some sort of other network-based attack, which could be anything as small as somebody that happens to be on your network and wanting to be evil, or as large as, like, you know, you're loading our app from Russia or China or something, and it's a state-level actor that's doing it on a mass scale. That initial load of the page over HTTP is not authenticated, and so it could lie to you. It could say, go load kremlin.shapeshift.com or something instead. I mean, not that that would work either, because, yeah. But anyway, they could tell you to go load some other completely unrelated site that's a phishing site or infected with malware or whatever. Strict transport security tells all the browsers of users that use your site that in the future, I will never use unencrypted connections, and you should not load it that way. So if you go to a website and that flag is set, then if you try to go to the insecure version, it'll just error on you. I mean, it'll upgrade. It'll upgrade the connection to HTTPS, but if that fails, it'll just error on you. It won't downgrade you and have you load it insecurely if the secure version is being blocked. So that's very valuable, especially for a site like ours where we're storing keys in the user's browser, right? Because anything that runs from app.shapeshift.com can access those keys. Well, if you're loading it over HTTPS, you have some relatively strong security guarantees about where the code came from. But if you are loading it over HTTP, it might just be some random dude that would like your seed very much, please. So HSTS is something that we've been trying to get turned on for a while that will stop that sort of thing from happening. Problem is that you can only turn it on and off for the entire shapeshift.com domain. That's just a limitation of the Cloudflare platform that hosts our DNS and stuff. So if you turn it on for the entire domain, it means that anything that happens to be attached to the domain that doesn't do HTTPS will break. And I've gone through the list of stuff that is on that domain, and we found a bunch of old things we can kill. And this of the stuff that's remaining right now, only SendGrid links that would have to do with those get sent out by the account system for the Axiom, the old beta.shapeshift.com platform. Only those are still unknown as to whether or not they support HTTPS and strict transport security. If we can prove that it does, or we can get rid of some of those links or some of those subdomains because they might not even be required anymore, it's tough to tell, then we can hit the magical button and turn the protection on for everything, and then everybody will be just a little bit more secure. We have that tentatively scheduled for next week when Major Hayes is back as well, just because if you screw it up and you tell consumers never respect anything I say unless it's over HTTPS, but you don't actually have HTTPS working on everything, then they will believe you. And, for however long the timeout was set for, that you gave them the header for, which can be anything from like 24 hours to like a year or more, they'll just be like, nope, I'm not going to load that. Clearly it must be under attack. So it's important to get right, because if you get it wrong, you can lock certain users out of your infrastructure for long periods of time. But I have confidence that we have gone through all the possible things, and if we can get the SendGrid thing squared away, either by nuking it or determining that it's not a problem, then we'll be able to hit that button, and everything will be slightly shinier, and no one will notice. Anyhow. Okay, well, hearing no more specific questions, I will pull Lo-Fi back up here, and I'll hang around in case anybody wants to ask more questions in the chat. But thank you all for coming, and I hope you have a good rest of the week.